I gave 17 years of my life to that company, sacrificing birthdays, holidays, even my own health, only to be discarded like trash in a 5-minute meeting. My boss's eyes were cold when he said, "David, we're eliminating your position." Behind him, HR smirked as if enjoying my downfall. Colleagues who once praised me now avoided my gaze, afraid to be tainted by my failure. But they had no idea what I carried with me: secrets, evidence, leverage. They thought they'd stolen my future. They didn't know I had the power to burn their empire from within. I didn't become dangerous overnight. My smile in that sterile office wasn't born from spite alone. It was built over years of sacrifice, silence, and small betrayals I swallowed until they stacked into a mountain. 17 years is long enough to build an empire, but also long enough to bury yourself beneath it. I knew both sensations well. When I first walked into the company as a young man, I was hungry to prove myself. I was the one who stayed late, answered emails at midnight, and volunteered for the assignments no one else wanted. I told myself it was temporary, just until I earned respect. But temporary turned into routine, and routine became my identity. I was David Miller, the dependable man who never said no. I remember one night clearly. It was 2 a.m., the building empty except for the hum of servers. I leaned back in my chair, eyes burning from the code I'd been debugging for hours. I should have gone home, should have kissed my daughter goodnight. Instead, I stared at the glowing screen until my vision blurred. That night, I solved a problem that saved the company millions, though the credit went elsewhere. I still drove home, exhausted, to peek into my daughter's room. She was asleep, tiny chest rising and falling, a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. I whispered an apology she never heard. "David," my wife Sarah said as I slid into bed, "you're disappearing from this family. One day she'll stop waiting for you." Her words cut deeper than any reprimand at work. But I convinced myself it was for them, for a better life. I didn't realize the price was something no paycheck could cover. The truth is, my contributions never wore my name. Projects I spearheaded were absorbed into committees. Final reports carried someone else's signature, and presentations I crafted were delivered by managers eager to impress the board. I was the architect who built castles, then watched others move in and hang their portraits on the walls. Still, I kept going, until the night I found something I shouldn't have, buried in the system, a vulnerability that could unravel everything if the wrong hands exploited it. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening, knowing its value. It wasn't just a bug. It was a backdoor into the company's beating heart. I could have reported it immediately, but instinct told me to hold back, to fix it quietly, later. So I tucked it away, like a loaded weapon hidden in plain sight. And maybe you've done the same. Kept a secret so dangerous that if you revealed it, the world around you would collapse. Life at the office didn't reward loyalty. It rewarded visibility. And visibility was something I lacked. Meetings that shaped the company's future happened behind closed doors. Doors I was no longer invited through. I'd watch Tom, the colleague I once trusted like a brother, walk into those rooms with a stack of my reports in his hand. Later, I'd hear him repeat my ideas as his own, polished just enough to sound fresh. The first time it happened, I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit. By the 5th time, I knew I was being erased. The worst moments weren't at work. They were at home. My daughter's birthday party fell on a Friday. I promised her, swore I'd be back by 6 to light the candles. At 4:30, An urgent meeting was called. My boss's glare made it clear there was no leaving. By the time I got home, balloons were deflated, the cake half eaten. She sat on the couch, eyes red, whispering to Sarah, "Dad always lies." I stood frozen in the doorway, watching my little girl's trust dissolve, knowing no explanation would fix it. It was after that night I started hearing my name where it didn't belong. In hushed conversations, behind half-closed doors, whispered in the restroom when they thought no one was around. My name tied to problems, to budgets overrun, to decisions I hadn't made. The air around me shifted. Glances turned sharper, silences heavier. I wasn't paranoid. I was being set up. One evening, after washing my hands in the restroom, I heard two voices outside. My boss's tone clipped, decisive. If David asks questions, shut him out. He's expendable. I gripped the sink until my knuckles whitened. Expendable. 17 years reduced to that one word. I waited until they left, then walked out with a face blank as stone. Inside, fire spread through me. A few days later, I caught something else. HR, normally stone-faced, bureaucratic, passed me in the hallway. She didn't speak, but she gave me a smile that lingered a second too long. It wasn't friendly. It was knowing. Like she was watching a storm approach and relishing the thunder. By then, the pattern was undeniable. I was being pushed out, erased piece by piece. And yet, the secret I carried, the flaw in their perfect machine, burned brighter in my mind. They could strip my title, steal my work, turn allies into traitors. But they didn't know what I knew. That knowledge was the ember I carried into every dark meeting, every betrayal, every quiet dismissal. They thought I was finished, but I was only beginning. The summons came on a Monday morning. I knew from the way my manager avoided my eyes that it wasn't about recognition or promotion. When HR called my name and asked me to follow them to the executive conference room, the entire floor grew quiet. 17 years of service, and the walk to that room felt like a funeral procession. The CEO sat at the head of the table, face expressionless. Beside him, the head of HR flipped through a folder as if rehearsing my obituary. "David," the CEO said, his voice detached, almost bored. "This company no longer has a place for you. Your position has been eliminated." The words hung heavy, but I stayed still. HR began to read from a prepared sheet, formal language about restructuring, efficiency, and how my contributions were appreciated. It didn't sound like gratitude. It sounded like sentencing. Around the table, colleagues who once laughed with me stared at the wood grain, unwilling to meet my eyes. I could almost hear their thoughts. Better him than me? Something inside me should have cracked. Rage, panic, begging. Any of it would have been expected. Instead, I smiled faintly and said, "I understand completely." The silence deepened, confusion flickering across faces. Why wasn't I fighting? Because none of them knew what I carried. That secret kept me standing straighter than ever. As I looked around the room, I realized with a chill that the man I thought had orchestrated this wasn't even present. The supervisor I suspected of undermining me for months was nowhere in sight. Which meant this wasn't his doing. It was bigger, older, woven long before today. I wasn't the victim of a sudden cut. I was the final step in a plan crafted with surgical precision. If you had given half your life to a company only to be discarded as an inconvenient number, would you still be loyal? Would you still believe loyalty mattered in a place built on greed? I left the room with my box of belongings, ignoring the whispers trailing behind me. That night, I opened my home office drawer and pulled out the external drives I had hidden for years. Every questionable contract, every email that bent the truth, every shadow transaction, they were all mine. And at the center of it, the flaw in their system, the one that could reduce their empire to rubble with a single spark. Later, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she asked why I looked so tired. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "When someone tries to bury the truth, you hold on to it. One day, it becomes the only weapon you need." Her small eyes widened, not understanding fully, but nodding as though she did. That innocence broke my heart even as it steeled my resolve. The next morning, a young analyst from accounting lingered at my desk while I packed the last of my files. He leaned closer and muttered, "You don't deserve this. I can help." His name was Eric. He had always been quiet, unremarkable, the type no one noticed. Was he truly offering an alliance? Or was this another test set by management to see how far I'd fall? His eyes held something between fear and desperation. I didn't answer him right away. I just gave a nod, careful, non-committal. If he was genuine, I'd know soon enough. If not, I'd already learned to expect betrayal. That evening, as I reviewed my old notes, the company's internal system glitched, reports stalled, emails delayed, servers hiccuped without explanation. Coincidence? Or had someone already stumbled into the flaw I kept hidden? I sat back, pulse hammering. With the evidence I had, I could cripple them tonight. One upload, one leak, and their fortress would crumble. But thousands of innocent employees, people with mortgages, children, lives tangled in this machine, would pay the price. That was the paradox of power. Holding the ability to destroy meant deciding who deserved destruction. I closed the laptop, staring into the dark. They thought firing me ended my story. But really, it was just the prologue. The trap was sprung a week after my dismissal. They summoned me back under the pretense of an exit interview, but the room was already set like a courtroom. A projector flickered to life, showing spreadsheets, emails, and signatures, mine, proving misconduct. Fraud, misallocation of funds, decisions I had never made. The evidence looked damning. The CEO leaned forward, voice sharp. "We can make this public, David. Or you can admit your part quietly and walk away with minimal damage." The implication was clear. Confess to crimes I didn't commit, or be crucified in the court of public opinion. For a moment, anger surged hot enough to consume me. Then, out of nowhere, one of my former colleagues, Jason, stood up. "This doesn't add up," he said firmly. "David wouldn't do this." The room shifted, attention swinging to him. For an instant, I felt a flicker of relief until I caught the way his eyes slid toward me, sharp and calculating. He wasn't defending me. He was fishing, waiting to see how I would respond, whether I would break under the pressure. I remembered Sarah's words the night before. "Don't let them steal your soul. They can take your job, your pride, but not who you are." Her voice echoed in my head as I steadied my breathing. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. After the meeting, HR slipped a folded envelope into my hand when no one was looking. Inside were documents, contracts, correspondence that revealed the fabricated nature of the accusations. She had risked her position to pass them to me. Later, she confessed quietly in the hallway, "I had no choice, David. They forced me to play along. But I couldn't watch them destroy you." For the first time, I realized the enemy wasn't a single face. It was a system that corrupted everyone it touched. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the damning documents and the evidence that proved them false. If I signed their confession, I could disappear with a shred of dignity, a neat ending to my career. If I fought, I risked dragging my family through hell, risking retaliation, maybe worse. The choice gnawed at me: surrender or expose. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I walked into my daughter's room and watched her breathing softly, innocence untouched by the storm circling outside. That was when the decision crystallized. I would not bow. If they wanted war, I would give them one, on my terms. The first strike was silent. I opened my vault of evidence, years of emails, contracts, and the blueprint of the flaw in their system. With careful precision, I began uploading pieces to encrypted servers, setting up channels to investigative journalists and regulators. It wasn't one leak. It was a cascade, designed to trigger in waves, each one more devastating than the last. Later that evening, I wrapped my arms around Sarah and our daughter. From now on, I told them softly, no one will ever treat us like we don't matter. I won't let them. Sarah searched my eyes, seeing the resolve there, and for once she didn't try to dissuade me. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became this wasn't just about my company. The contracts linked to shell corporations, the payments connected to government accounts. It was a network, an entire chain of corruption that stretched far beyond one office. My battle wasn't just revenge anymore, it was exposure. As the first files triggered, the company's system faltered. Servers glitched, data vanished, and messages began to circulate online. The CEO received frantic calls as the foundation of his empire trembled. Somewhere in the chaos, a spark of satisfaction burned in me. Yet even then I wondered, how many innocent lives would be shaken by what I had unleashed? If you've ever dreamed of seeing a tyrant brought low, you'll know the thrill I felt that night. But have you ever wondered if justice, when it finally arrives, punishes more than just the guilty? The first wave hit like a storm. By dawn, the headlines blazed across every business outlet. Major tech firm under fire for corruption and data mismanagement. Screens filled with speculation. Analysts dissecting the company's failures. Stock tickers bleeding red as shares plummeted. Years of reputation unraveled in hours. I sat in my living room with the television muted, watching the crawl at the bottom of the screen spell out their downfall in real time. What surprised me wasn't the coverage. It was the details. Some of the documents being cited weren't mine. Buried among the evidence were files I had never seen, records that exposed levels of corruption far deeper than I had uncovered. Someone else was feeding the fire. My first reaction was suspicion. Was this an ally, or another player in the shadows with their own agenda? Either way, it meant I wasn't alone, and that truth unsettled me as much as it reassured me. Sarah paced the kitchen, arms crossed, her face pale with worry. "You're playing a dangerous game, David," she said. "This isn't just about revenge anymore. These are powerful people. If they find out it's you—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "I know," I said quietly. "But if we let them win, what example do I set for our daughter? That we should stay silent while they crush anyone who doesn't obey?" She shook her head, torn between fear and admiration. "Just promise me you won't lose yourself in this. Don't let hate be the only thing that keeps you going." Her words stayed with me all afternoon, even as my phone buzzed with alerts of the chaos I'd unleashed. By evening, I opened my laptop and found an email waiting. The subject line was blank. The body contained just 4 words. "We know who you are?" My blood chilled. The anonymity of it was worse than any direct threat. Somewhere out there, someone was watching me, close enough to send a message, but distant enough to remain faceless. The next week, the collapse accelerated. Regulators descended on the company headquarters, demanding records and freezing accounts. Executives scrambled, their polished public smiles cracking into panic behind closed doors. Employees fled in droves, resumes flooding rival firms. The building that once buzzed with ambition now smelled of fear. Every news cycle brought new revelations. Offshore accounts, kickbacks tied to government contracts, intimidation of whistleblowers. The rot went deeper than I had imagined. And then came the twist I hadn't expected. Tom, the colleague who had once stolen my work and whispered in back rooms, was thrown to the wolves. The CEO announced his immediate termination for gross misconduct, painting him as the mastermind of the fraud. I knew better. Tom was guilty, yes, but not guilty alone. He was a convenient scapegoat, sacrificed so the higher powers could distance themselves. Watching his career disintegrate should have satisfied me, but instead, I felt only the bitter sting of recognition. That was supposed to be me in his place. They had meant for me to be the fall guy. At home, the fallout pressed closer. My daughter climbed into my lap one night, eyes wide with worry. "Daddy," she whispered, "are you doing the right thing?" Children have a way of cutting through pretenses with a single question. I swallowed hard. "I'm trying to," I said. "Sometimes the right thing hurts before it heals." She nodded solemnly, though I knew she didn't fully understand. Her faith in me was a weight heavier than any evidence I carried. The government's investigation tightened around the company, and my name inevitably surfaced. Whispers that I had been the source of the leaks circulated. Friends stopped calling, unsure if contact with me would taint them. Even neighbors seemed to keep their distance, their greetings shorter, cautious. I began to wonder if justice was worth the isolation it brought. Then came the summons. I was asked to testify. My evidence could dismantle the last defenses of the executives, but doing so would put me in direct confrontation with forces that had already proven they could fabricate evidence and silence dissenters. To speak would mean risking not only my safety, but my family's. To remain silent might let them survive to rebuild, stronger and more ruthless. I sat awake at the kitchen table again, papers spread before me, Sarah asleep upstairs. The choice clawed at me. Justice or survival? Truth or safety? Would you testify if it meant placing a target squarely on your chest? The decision was still unresolved when the knock came. Slow, deliberate, unmistakable. I rose, every nerve alert, and opened the door. Standing on my porch, dressed in his immaculate suit, was the CEO. His eyes no longer carried the smug detachment of a man in control. They carried something colder, sharper, desperation. "David," he said softly, "we need to talk." The air inside my house thickened the moment the CEO stepped over the threshold. Sarah's hand tightened on my arm, her whisper urgent. "Don't let him near her." Our daughter's frightened eyes peeked from behind Sarah's leg. I nodded once, sending them upstairs, closing the living room door with a deliberate click. The silence left behind was sharp enough to cut skin. The CEO stood in the center of my living room. No entourage, no lawyers. Just him, stripped of power's armor. For the first time, He looked human, sweat beading his forehead, jaw tense. He glanced at the family photos on the wall, his eyes flickering with something like shame before landing back on me. "David," he began, voice low. "This wasn't supposed to happen to you, to any of us." I laughed, bitter and short. 17 years, and that's your apology? You destroyed me, my career, and you say it wasn't supposed to happen? His gaze dropped. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "I'm not the mastermind. I never was. I'm just a puppet." The words hit harder than any insult. A puppet. For a moment, I saw not the arrogant leader who dismissed me, but a man chained, dancing for hands I couldn't see. "There's a board above me," he continued. "Investors, officials, men who never show their faces. They pull the strings. Every deal, every cover-up, every sacrifice, it's all orchestrated from the shadows. I'm disposable to them, just like you were to me. Would you forgive someone who tried to destroy you if you knew they were also a victim of something larger?" The question spun in my head even as anger simmered beneath my skin. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small USB drive on the table between us. The metal gleamed under the lamp. "This," he said, "is everything. Proof of how deep it goes. Names, transactions, networks that reach far beyond our company. I can't keep it anymore. But you might know what to do with it." My heart pounded. A single drive that could topple not just a company, but entire institutions. My fingers brushed the cool metal, and I felt the weight of an empire pressing down on me. The CEO's eyes burned into mine. "You think you've been fighting me, David. But the war is bigger, much bigger. If you go after them, you won't just be exposing corruption. You'll be challenging a system that's lived in the shadows for decades. They will come for you." Before I could answer, a thump upstairs reminded me of the cost. Sarah shielding our daughter, praying this would end without violence. My choices weren't mine alone. The CEO left soon after, his shoulders sagging, a man broken by his own confessions. I locked the door behind him, gripping the USB like a live grenade. Days passed, and I dug into the files. What I found was staggering. Offshore accounts tied to officials, politicians laundering money through shell corporations, and connections that linked my company's scandals to a sprawling global network. This wasn't corruption. It was architecture, designed and maintained by people with enough power to erase anyone who got too close. I wasn't alone anymore, though. I revealed pieces of the data to my quiet ally, Eric from accounting, and he didn't flinch. Instead, he introduced me to others, journalists, lawyers, even an insider within government ranks. They called themselves the Just Network, a loose web of people determined to expose rot from within. The real twist came when I learned one of their strongest backers wasn't just an activist. It was a senior figure inside the government itself, a man with influence, resources, and the will to fight. He had been silently supporting whistleblowers for years, gathering evidence, waiting for someone to bring him a match to light the fire. When I told my mother about it all, her lined face softened with pride. "You've done what your father never dared," she whispered. "He saw injustice, but kept silent. You chose differently." But the decision before me was crueler than anything I had faced. If I released everything, the world would shake. Entire industries could collapse. Innocent employees could lose their livelihoods. If I held back, the guilty would thrive in silence, shielded by the ruin of others. Justice demanded sacrifice, but whose sacrifice would it be? Late at night, I sat at my desk, staring at the USB drive. Sarah stood in the doorway, quiet, waiting. She didn't push me one way or another. Her silence said everything. Whatever choice I made, we would bear it together. I lifted the drive, its reflection cold and sharp in my eyes. The decision weighed like a stone on my chest. But one thing was clear. Whichever path I chose, it would change not just me or my company, but the entire industry built on greed and silence. The lamp flickered. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. My eyes locked on the drive. The future tilted on a razor's edge. The decision to release the files reshaped everything. Investigations swept across industries. Powerful names fell. And the network that had thrived in shadows for decades fractured under its own weight. For the first time in years, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet, and yet the battle had left scars on me, on my family, on the life I thought I'd live forever. Months later, I walked into a new office building, not sleek with arrogance like the one I had left behind, but warm, transparent, almost startling in its simplicity. People greeted each other with genuine smiles, not calculated masks. This was no ordinary company. As I signed the papers for my new role, I discovered the truth. It had been founded by survivors of the same corrupted system I had fought. Engineers who had been silenced, managers discarded, whistleblowers buried. All had come together to create something better. The realization hit me like a jolt. My exile had led me here, not to an ending, but to a beginning. One morning, for the first time in years, I walked my daughter to school. The air was crisp. Her small hand curled tight around mine. She skipped beside me, telling me about her drawing contest, about the cake she wanted for her next birthday. I wasn't distracted by emails or looming deadlines. I was there, truly there. When we reached the school gates, she kissed my cheek and said, "You came, Dad. You didn't break your promise." My throat tightened. It was such a simple moment, but it was worth more than every late-night achievement I'd ever chased. Work at the new company wasn't about climbing ladders or hoarding credit. It was about building something honest. For once, my skills were recognized without manipulation, my ideas valued without theft. And still, shadows lingered. Late one evening, I opened my inbox to find an email from a corporate giant I hadn't touched in years. No subject line, only a sentence in the body. "They need you." A chill ran through me. A call to another war? Or a trap? The future whispered promises and threats in equal measure. Meanwhile, the world outside continued to turn. My old company, once untouchable, now staggered under forced reform. Executives were indicted, systems overhauled, policies rewritten. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was proof that no empire is immune when the truth claws its way to light. At home, life softened in ways I hadn't thought possible. My daughter's next birthday came, and I was there from the first balloon to the last candle. She beamed as I cut the cake with her, chanting, "Dad's here! Dad's here!" For once, I wasn't the absent figure watching from a doorway. I was part of the memory. And then, the final twist I never expected. A letter arrived in the mail, handwritten, the ink shaky, but deliberate. It was from Tom, the man who had betrayed me, stolen my work, left me for dead in the office arena. He wrote of his downfall, of how he had been discarded just as easily, and of how he now worked as a volunteer at a shelter, trying to rebuild something human in himself. "I was wrong," the letter said. "I see now what greed made me. I can't undo what I did to you, David, but I hope you can believe I'm not that man anymore. I sat with the letter for a long time, not sure if forgiveness was possible, but knowing the cycle had shifted. Even traitors could seek redemption when stripped of their illusions. One evening, I visited my mother. She touched my hand and said, "Justice may stumble, may crawl, may take years, but it never disappears. You carried it further than I thought anyone could. You've given your daughter a story of courage, not silence." Her pride was quiet, but it anchored me in a way no applause ever could. In the end, the lesson was simple but unshakable. Justice may come late, but it always arrives. The cost is high, but the reward is measured not in victory alone, but in the lives it reshapes. That night, after Sarah and our daughter had gone to bed, I sat quietly at her bedside, watching her sleep. Her hair spilled across the pillow, her small chest rising steadily, her stuffed rabbit still tucked beneath her chin. I leaned close, whispered into the stillness. I kept my promise. And for the first time in 17 years, the words felt true.